I was back home in Devon, and as ever, when I'm back home in Devon, at about 6 in the morning, my 8-year-old came beetling into bed with me and crawled me in and shook me. "Are you awake, Mummy?" "Oh, I am now." And he said to me, Mummy, did you know that the farmers in Africa who make chocolate only get 5p out of every pound? Did you know that the 5 richest brands in the world have more money than the 46 poorest countries in the world? Yes, I said, I knew. Well, what are you going to do about it? We are borrowing the future from our children. I really believe that. And that question of what are we going to do about it really plays large for me. And the journey I'm going to take you through this morning is really sort of thinking about what is the context of the world that I see we're operating in, and what's the journey that we're going through as a business, and what are the very real challenges that I believe that we face as we try to do something different in the world. So the world that we're in, what's the world that I see, that we see? Well, we know that things that when I was growing up seemed sort of esoteric about the world reaching the limits of its sustainable resources are now becoming really very close and real, aren't they? If the winter had been less kind to us, we probably would have again been sitting around candles wondering about whether we had power and the supply. When you look through to 2020, they now project that half the world will be living in water scarcity. And so these are now very real issues. And they're real issues that businesses face in their planning. And when we start to look at those challenges from a business perspective, you start to think about the long-term success of business means that we can't just pretend these things don't exist anymore. And we can either choose to sit back and wait for others to solve problems, or to step forward and be part of the solution. Now, in those changes in the world with globalization, the move of power to east to west, there are also tremendous new opportunities unfolding. Opportunities to solve problems in different ways. We've got this great transparency, haven't we? Chris Anderson from TED Talks tweeted once, "It's a bad time to be evil." I really like that, and I really hope so. Sometimes reading some of the stuff coming from the States, you wonder. But I have faith that humanity will prevail and do the right thing. We've also got this amazing connectivity. Even this morning, Kate woke up and I was picking up messages from colleagues in India and Vietnam, businesses trying to do different things across the world. That potential to connect, to share ideas, to do things differently is just phenomenal. And then we've also got this emerging new way of thinking about how we solve problems, how we do business, to a business that's moving from a belief that if I have an idea, then what I need to do is hold it really tight in my hand and keep it to myself. And if I squeeze my hand tight enough, I might have a diamond that I can keep all to myself. To a world that says, well, just perhaps, if I approach the world with an open hand and reach out and share my ideas and resources, that together we can create something different and solve problems in a new way. Because I put it to you that the problems facing the world today aren't ones that any organization, any individual is going to be addressed on their own. Just like a single voice singing doesn't have the power of a choir that's singing together. And those changes in the world also really are changes that manifest at an individual level as well. We certainly see that when we're looking at our people in an organization, through the last recession, I think that we finally broke the final sort of, the loose cord of the contract between individuals and the idea of a contract for life and that trust between organizations. I think it finally got severed. And what people are looking for now in their work are things that, money, it matters. You've got to pay enough to take money off the table. But actually the things around, is there meaning in my work? Do I feel proud when I'm sitting with friends, family, and saying, this is where I work? Do I feel proud that I'm working somewhere meaningful? Do I feel I can contribute? Have I got autonomy? Can I actually do things and make things happen that make me feel valuable and valued? And am I given the space to get really good at what I'm doing, that mastery? So we know that we've got those things happening, the world changing and what people want changing. And the role for, I think, us as business leaders is to think about, well, how then do we need to be? How then do we fit in? So let me tell you a little bit about the journey that we've been on at Grant Thornton over the last few years. And I say the last few years because whilst I was very blessed to be appointed CEO on 1st of July 2015, I certainly wouldn't credit the journey just down to me. It's been a groundswell really coming up from people within the business who believe that we can play a part that is important and different. So on the journey to purpose, and as Charles said, purpose can be a very overused word. I think the first thing that I always go back to is the words that were ascribed to Michelangelo when asked about how he created David, was that David was always there within the stone. His job was just to reveal him. And I do believe that when you're looking at organizations, that trying to stick something onto an organization is never the right way to do it. It's very much thinking about how can you really unleash what is already there and make that transparent. So we went through a journey of 3 different elements. One is how could we reveal our organizational purpose? Then how could we connect individuals to that purpose? And then what could we do that really made that central to everything that we do in how we operate? So the reveal was actually very simple. We started actually with our clients. Because often, I don't know about you, sometimes the individuals can't see the spark in themselves that's special, but it's someone else who can say, I know when you light up, I know what you're really about. And our clients were able to give us that real insight into our ability to spot potential and to help it grow. And we started to form words around that, about what if, instead of operating within an economy, we were using our influencing power to step up and shape an economy. And when you start to think about your impact as an organization beyond your boundaries, and we started to think about, well, actually, we work with 40% of the public sector. We are the top 3 advisor in the 3rd sector. Our private sector clients employ 6.6 million employees in the UK. That's 25% of private sector employment in the UK. You suddenly think, actually, operating in that wider sphere, we really can make a difference. And we then started with a deep session, which was actually just about this time last year, actually, with our partners. We spent a whole morning with them, actually getting them to think about their personal purpose. And that was a really interesting session. A really interesting session, because as people came back into the room talking about what mattered to them in their lives, I then picked on one of our highest fee-earning partners in our business and asked him to share his purpose. And there were a lot of people sitting there thinking, oh yeah, he's just in it for the money. And instead, when he was asked what mattered to him, he said, I want my children to be proud of me. I want my children to be proud of me. You could have heard a pin drop, because that wasn't what people were expecting to hear. And as people started to make that connection between what mattered to them and how they wanted to make people feel to what we were doing as a business, you start to create those gossamer threads of connection that really are going to matter, I think, if we're going to do something fundamentally different in business. And then we looked at how do we really embed this? And we broke down our purpose into different elements of how do we believe we could make the biggest impact, informing trust and integrity in the markets, unlocking growth in dynamic organizations, and creating environments where businesses and people can flourish. And thinking about how through who we work with, through what we do, through how we are as a business, and through what we speak out on, we have a power and an ability to influence. And we need to use that responsibly to make a difference. And that's where we're at. We've now been through really embedding that into our business, choosing what we invest in, what we disinvest in, choosing who we work with, who we don't work with. So what are the challenges? What are the challenges that we face? Well, in some respects, I think that we're in the cusp of going through almost a corporate revolution, just as we went through an industrial revolution, where when you start to run your business this way, you're going against the established norms of what's expected. From a very practical perspective, we have a paradigm out there in the world that has something that leads to one of my partners who beautifully stood and drew a graph for me where they had purpose on one axis and profit on one axis. And so we've got to be careful with this purpose thing. because we are a business and we've got to make money. And I said, if that's the picture you're drawing, you've got the wrong picture. Because profit and purpose actually go hand in hand together. It's like a yin and a yang. They're not on separate bits of the axis, but the world that we're in sees them as separate. And that separation, I think, could be our downfall in business. We also have a model of leadership where leaders are expected to be perfect. Lucy Kellaway wrote about it beautifully about a month ago, that she felt that the top thing that CEOs needed to be able to do was an ability to lie really well. Isn't that depressing? That, our premier business newspaper is writing that as this is what's needed. Because actually, to really be a true, authentic, purpose-led business, you need to be able to talk about the things that aren't going well. The fact that sometimes you won't behave in the way that you aspire to. And to be able to do that truthfully without being knocked down for it. And that's quite hard. And getting people comfortable with a leader that isn't perfect, that will say when they don't think they're getting it right. And to be able as a leader to hold that when that feels really uncomfortable is quite tough. To go through the choices of who we act for and who we don't, that's actually quite a tough one as well. I've spent quite a bit of time actually out meeting with clients who I have questions around, do they align with our purpose or not? And can we continue working together? We've come to a very clear position around, look, we don't think we're perfect. We don't expect the people we work with to be perfect, but we would like people to be wanting to go on the same journey in the same direction. And those are conversations where you meet CEO to CEO, you can actually establish really, is there a genuine belief and a desire to change and do things differently or not? And we need to choose who we work with. We've turned down quite a bit of work on that basis. That can be quite tough in a business. What's great is that those conversations are now coming up from below rather than ones that are being imposed from on high. But I thought I'd finish by just sharing with you some words that really talk to, I think, probably the biggest challenge, particularly when you're taking an organization that's operating a certain way and then trying to change it. And to try and change it into an organization where things are happening from the bottom up. You're trusting people with their ideas, you're letting go, and you're creating possibilities, not just operating from a performance management kind of perspective. And I thought I'd share these words, because every time I've shared them, people have said they've been very powerful for them. And so there's some words from Parker J. Palmer on creating communities. And he said, ironically, we often resist leaders who call upon our resourcefulness. We find it threatening when leaders say, I'm not going to tell you how to do this, let alone do it for you, but I'm going to create a space in which you can do it for yourselves. Why threatening? Because many of us have been persuaded by institutions ranging from educational to industrial to religious that we don't have the resources to do things or even think things for ourselves, which, to the extent that we believe it, expands an institution's power over our lives. Many people have been convinced of their own inadequacy, and any leader who wants to invite them into a community of mutual resourcefulness must see this invisible wound and try to heal it. There is a name for what leaders experience during the prolonged period of patient waiting. It's called suffering, which is the root meaning of the word patience. Suffering is what happens when you see the possibilities in others while they deny those same possibilities in themselves. Suffering is what happens when you hold in trust a space for community to emerge, but others lack the trust to enter the space and to receive the gift. Suffering is what happens while you wait out their resistance, believing that people have more resources than they themselves believe they have. But leaders don't want to suffer. So we create and maintain institutional arrangements that protect leaders from suffering by assuming the worst of followers and encouraging leaders to dominate them by means of power. I put to you that a really purpose-led organization needs leaders who are prepared to stay in that space of suffering and create the space for others to step into. And just like when we watch children learning to walk and the first time they fall over, that what we don't do is rush in and say, oh, well, you're rubbish at that, we better get you some wheels. Instead, we encourage and support and create the space until they can confidently step into a new space and really unlock the potential within. Thank you.
Peter Thompson from the Earthword.
Hi.
I'm just interested to know what you think about how the language that we use and the legitimacy in the office to talk about ethics and have sort of ethics talk, how that contributes to the paradigm change you're talking about.
I think language is critically important. It's something that probably my colleagues internally get a bit fed up with me about, because I do think it's quite important just how you speak about people. We deliberately talk about our people as people, not as staff, which Mel Winwell, who's my colleague in the audience, is someone who really sort of opened up into that. I think that, starting the conversation about purpose and having that overarching, that North Star of where you're guiding to, has been tremendously helpful for us, because it does start to give people that anchor point of, well, if this is what we're about, how does this then fit? And I think giving people a language to use so they have the permission to have those conversations is really important. And interestingly, I think that for us, certainly internally, the word purpose sometimes can be suddenly, for the more cynics in the audience, can be a bit like, oh yeah, she's on about purpose again. But when you actually start to talk about, well, look, we're all about trying to shape a vibrant economy. These are the areas where we can impact. What are you doing that's actually going to make a difference to that? How does this fit? Then you find that becomes a very natural language, because actually that's how people think, and it's part of how we operate as a business.
Hi, Andrew Thornton from Heart and Business. Very inspiring. It's fantastic to see someone leading an organisation of your size talking about this. I'm really interested, you talk about individuals' purpose or mission. Mm-hmm. How do you uncover that in an organisation of your size with thousands and thousands of people? How do you get to help people figure out what their purpose is?
It's a great question. We've been experimenting for some years about how you really work with individuals to help them to really uncover their whole selves and make sure that they are that whole person at work, not just bringing in that sort of work face, that mask thing. And so we've embedded it through all of our personal development programs, and also spent quite a lot of time exploring not only face-to-face interactions. So over the last summer, we had over 1,500 people spending time face-to-face exploring if this is what about, how are we, and how does this connect with me personally? But also creating space using social platforms for people to have those conversations. And it's been really interesting, actually, seeing how, as people step forward and share things that personally matter to them, and that community builds, how that then fits into people making sense of how we do things as a business. And some of it is quite deep and quite powerful. One of the threads on a social platform have been a community of people who've emerged for whom they've experienced suicide of close people in their families. But I think that for me, being in a place where we've got a community of some 4,500 people where they're prepared to share something so personal to themselves with colleagues and reach out to help each other has been really powerful. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. We've invested an awful lot also in a coaching culture. So we have over, I think, 200 now qualified coaches within the organisation, from partners right through the organisation. And so that whole idea of our role as leaders isn't to tell people what to do, it's to actually uncover the brilliance within them, is something that is really increasingly being embedded through the organisation. Certainly not perfect yet. I'm sure you could all go out and find people who haven't got that experience of the organisation right now, but it's certainly, that's the path and the journey we're on.